Okay. We're going to call to order. It is 6:32. So just noting that Chris Marco is unavailable tonight. Do we need to approve the agenda? Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Agenda approved. Brief announcements from staff and commissioners and council liaisons. Is there anything?
I have a quick announcement, just as a reminder, tomorrow night I'll be making a presentation about an update on homelessness here in the city of Davis, with an emphasis on an update on what's happening at the residence center. So I said I'll do that, and tomorrow night's meeting will be at council. You're welcome to attend.
Thank you.
May I ask a quick question on that? Will you also be sharing some of that update tonight in your regular updates?
No, because the
Not at all.
presentation is for council.
Okay.
I'm happy to talk about it after we've made our presentation to council, but I did want you to see it because it's been published in the council agenda. Didn't want you to be surprised.
Any other announcements from commissioners or liaison? Okay, we'll move on to public comment. Any public comment? Seeing none. Moving right along. Consent calendar. Can we approve the minutes that were included with the consent calendar?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. The minutes have been approved. So next we have an informational item. Dana?
So tonight we'll be hearing from our community development department and our consultant. They'll be providing an update on our general plan presentation, so I'm going to turn it over to Dara Duckworth.
Thank you, Dana. Good evening, Commissioners. Dara Dunworth, Principal Planner. The pleasure this evening of bringing the general plan update back to you all. This is a follow-up to the Commission Palooza event that we had, or I should say workshop that we had back in April that was part of the kickoff of the general plan update. Here tonight to seek your input based on the vision and project outcomes. If there are any key issues and or potential strategies to bridge that gap between the vision and the outcomes. So we're looking for your feedback this evening. And I have the pleasure of introducing Eric Yukovich with Ramey and Associates. They are our general plan update consultant, and I will hand it over to Eric now. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Dara, and good evening, everyone. Eric Yukovich, principal at Ramey and Associates. Really excited to be here with you all this evening to get a chance to hear from you on the general plan update. Make sure I know where I'm pointing this thing at. So first I'm going to do just a kind of an overview of where we are in the general plan process. I'm going to just refresh your memories about that vision statement and those project outcomes you all talked about back in the spring, but we've been talking to folks about throughout the course of our engagement. And then I'm going to just kind of start to lay out some of the existing conditions analysis that we've been doing, mostly focused on some demographics, housing, and then disadvantaged communities analysis we've been doing as part of our work overall. That's really just to tee up a conversation with you all this evening, as Dara said, about making sure that we're covering the key topics that we need to cover in this general plan update, and then to kind of pivot from the topics to talk about what are the strategies that we want to move forward with in this process to really help bridge the gap between those issues in the project vision and outcomes overall. This is an illustration of our general plan process overall. We're really at the beginning phase of work in the kind of the listening and visioning phase, but we're wrapping that phase up. So we've done a series of community engagements all throughout the summer. We've been meeting with each of the commissions individually. This is the 5th of the 6 commissions that we've done this fall. And what we're doing now is kind of finalizing the feedback that we get on those issues, the existing conditions, the vision and principles that will really lay the foundation for the rest of the project overall. There we go. I'll figure it out eventually. One of the things that I just want to kind of highlight is that part of this process is we're going to be updating the general plan overall. There are 8 mandatory elements that we're going to be looking at as part of that process. So we'll be working on both the land use and mobility plan, the kind of concepts that underlay the foundation of the plan itself, but then also starting to develop the policy across all of the other elements of the general plan itself. So this looks like a very linear process. It won't be. These processes will be overlapping as we go forward. Yes, there we go. I knew eventually if I hit it enough times. So as I mentioned, we're going through this process of where we're meeting with each of the city's commissions on kind of existing conditions, issues, and strategies overall. Then we'll really be pivoting to the next phase of engagement where we're focused on, really focused on land use concepts and mobility concepts, so how we accommodate our future housing and jobs needs in the community. We'll be back with you probably in the spring to early summer next year to meet with you on those. Since we last met with you all, we published our project website. It's at davisgeneralplan.com. There, if you go there, you'll find all the project resources that have been published. So all of the existing conditions, reports and analysis, summaries from the meetings and workshops, all of those resources are being pulled together on that page, as well as future meetings overall. We have been doing a series of engagement, as I mentioned, throughout the summer. One of the big meetings that we had was our first community workshop. We had about 175 people there. We had a really great turnout. A room that's a little too small, but good turnout there. And we really got great feedback from folks in that meeting. That, at the same time, we launched a community survey that just closed a couple of weeks ago that we're publishing the results from, and then also started what we call Meeting in the Box. Some of you might have been involved in some of that, but we've had a couple of community members and community groups use that toolkit and hosted their own meetings. And then we've been doing pop-up meetings around the community. So we've been kind of collecting feedback a lot about the vision and project outcomes and the key issues that folks want to see us move forward as part of this process. Again, all of that information we publish is being published on the project website. Now, before we get into kind of the existing conditions work that we've been doing, that technical analysis, just wanted to take a second to root everybody in the vision that we're trying to achieve through this process. We shared this with you all back in the spring and made some edits to it based on the feedback we got on the vision and then the project outcomes. But the vision really, I think, establishes where we want to be in the future. It's not necessarily a reflection of where we are currently today, but where we want to try and achieve, what we want to try and get to through the implementation of the work that the city's already doing and then through the general plan itself. Now, that vision itself is underpinned by a series of what we call project outcomes. These are kind of like guiding principles with the intent of really having us focus on the most important issues that we're seeing within the community. These cover everything from healthy and resilient communities, those principles are up on your screen now, to community engagement, leadership, and even document preparation. Those are those principles here today. Now I'm going to just share a little bit of those high-level existing conditions with you all. So our team has been doing a series of technical studies. Again, those are now published on the project website. There's one left to be published. I think it will go up tomorrow morning. That's the environmental justice existing commissions report. All the other ones are published on the website. I'm going to focus today on a sliver of that. There are 800 pages of reports there, so I'm going to focus on just on housing and some of the discussion around disadvantaged communities. Again, the purpose of this isn't necessarily to get your feedback on the existing conditions, but really to make sure that we're touching on the most important issues here in Davis, and then also, again, like how do we bridge the gap between those issues and the vision and project outcomes. One of the first things we always look at when we walk into the community are some of the demographic conditions within the community and how they're evolving and changing over time. So since 1990, the city of Davis has been growing. It's about 44% since 1990. But over the last 3 to 5 years, that population has fallen a little bit, about 1% overall. It's the most populous city, as you all know, in Yolo County. One of the questions we have been getting throughout this process is how does the city of Davis, or how does the city of Davis's population relate to UC Davis's population overall? Everyone knows that UC Davis's population has been growing over time. They've added additional students and staff over the last several decades and in the last 10 years. There are currently about 48,000 students, faculty, and staff at UC Davis. About 23,000 of those students, faculty, and staff live here within the city of Davis. Now, just to confirm and make sure everyone knows this, UC Davis is actually not inside the city limits, it's just on the outside of the city limits. So it's actually, most of the university facilities are outside the city. About 24% of those students, faculty, and staff do not live in the city of Davis or on UC Davis's campus, so they're commuting in from somewhere. And then about 30% both live and go to school or work on campus or in the West Village. So that gives you a sense of the commute patterns and where folks are moving to and from. One of the things we also looked at in our work is how those demographic shifts have happened across the city. So these little graphics, each of those graphics is 100 squares, they're 10 by 10. Each of those little squares represents 1% of the population. So if you look at the top left corner under Davis 2010, this is the racial and ethnic population of the city in 2010. So if you count up those little dark blue squares, they're about 22% of the population identify as Asian in 2010. If you go across the top in 2023, it's about 23%. So these are illustrating the proportion of the population of race and ethnicity in the city. So at the same time the city's been growing overall, it's becoming more diverse. Particularly the population that identifies as Latino or two or more races has grown in the last decade, just over the last decade or so here within the city of Davis. And conversely, the white alone population has declined. You can see on the right-hand side, the UC Davis, what we call the census designated place. So again, UC Davis isn't in the city of Davis, so we look at it separately sometimes, and you can see the makeup of folks, the demographic and ethnic race makeup of folks in that area. So as the city's grown, become more diverse, it's also aging. So this illustrates the change in population age here within Davis between 2010 and 2023. Over the last 10 years or so, the population over the age of 65 has grown almost 60% overall. This is tracking with statewide and countywide trends as populations are aging, but it's happening more quickly here. Simultaneously, you can see there's been a decline in the population age 18 and under. Again, this tracks with Yolo County and statewide trends in particular, but again, it's happening a little bit more quickly than the state is overall. And this is really consistent, I think, with what you've probably been hearing about enrollment at Davis Unified School District. So one of the things that we'll be thinking about, talking about a lot during this process is land use, because really at the heart of every general plan update is the land use plan itself. It really lays the foundation for how we plan for existing and future needs for businesses, for homes, for community amenities. It also influences the sustainability of our communities, how we travel, how many resources we use. So we'll be talking a lot about land use overall. This map shows the existing land use pattern within the city. So typically the blues are institutional or public facilities, the greens are open spaces and parks, the yellows on the map, of yellows to oranges, are residential types, and the reds and purples are kind of more commercial and industrial types. One of the things that we talk about a lot in this we'll be talking about in the process is that the city is largely built out. So most of the area within inside the city limits have existing buildings on them overall. This graph here shows that same map, and what we've done again is looked at it by proportion. So again, this is 100 squares, it's a 10 by 10. So each of those squares represents 1% of the city's existing land area. So in the top left corner, you see the dark purple. That's mixed use. So 1% of the area of the city is currently mixed use types, which are a mix of residential, commercial types on the same parcel. That's generally near downtown. Then you can see about 6% of the areas for commercial uses, 4% for office, 2% for industrial. So about a little less than 15% of the city's land area is devoted to commercial and mixed uses. About 10% is devoted to public facilities, that's blue. About 15%, 13% to city parks and open space within the city limits. And about 2/3 of the land area in the city is devoted to housing. Now about 50% of that area that's devoted to housing is devoted to kind of lower density housing. So that's primarily single family homes. About 16% is devoted to kind of everything from townhomes to small multifamily to a little bit larger multifamily. And then you can see at the very end, about 1% of the city is vacant land. So a very small proportion of the city is vacant. Most of it's occupied by different kinds of uses. Now this graphic starts to show the proportion of housing units by type. So Davis is on the left-hand side and Yolo County is on the right-hand side. So now you'll recall that about 16% of the area of the city is devoted to townhomes, and small multifamily homes, but that 16% of the area houses almost 45% of all of the housing units in the city. About 50% of the city is devoted to single family homes, so lower density housing, as we saw. That's about 55% of the housing units overall. So you can see a small portion of the city houses most of the population, most of the housing units here within the city. And what you can see when you compare it to Yolo County is that you have a much, much greater proportion of multifamily than Yolo County. That makes a lot of sense. You're next to the university, you're housing a lot, there's a lot of student housing and a lot of family housing in multifamily housing units. We also know that about 57% of the homes are renter occupied. So that's more than just the multifamily housing stock that you have in the city. That represents about 43, 45% of the total housing stock, but about 57% are renter occupied. So a bunch of your single family housing stock is also rented out overall. So these are some of the things that we're seeing in housing here in the city. Now, as the city has continued to grow, we also know that there's a continued need for workforce and affordable housing. You'll recall through the housing element process that the city had to identify sites to accommodate at least 2,000 additional housing units at a variety of income levels, mostly moderate and lower income types. And likewise, we also know that UC Davis, through its long-range development plan, also has capacity to add additional housing units, both for faculty and staff on site. However, it's not clear that they're going to accommodate that over the timeline of the long-range development plan. What's important about this for this process for the general plan is that we're thinking not just one housing element cycle into the future, we're thinking 2 housing element cycles in the future, 3 housing element cycles in the future, 3.5 cycles into the future. So when we're thinking about planning for and meeting the needs of housing in the community, we're not just thinking about these 2,000 units, but we're trying to think about the next 2.5 housing element cycles beyond this into the future. All right, switching gears a little bit, what appears to be slightly abrupt change in the presentation overall is we're going to talk a little bit about SB 1000 and the requirements for environmental justice elements in general plans. So SB 1000 went into effect in 2016, and it was passed in 2016, went into effect in 2018. Its purpose is really to ensure that cities and counties across the state of California plan for and address the compounded and unique health impacts that disadvantaged communities face. Where the legislation asks us to look at how we can reduce pollution exposure in those communities, how we can improve access to public facilities, and how we can improve overall community health. Now, SB 1000 requires cities and counties to develop an environmental justice element if they have, quote, disadvantaged communities, and also whether they're concurrently updating 2 or more elements of the general plan. So we're doing 7 elements in the general plan through this process. So this is one of the requirements that we look at and screen for. If you find disadvantaged communities in that screening, you either create a standalone EJ element, environmental justice element, or you integrate policies throughout the general plan itself. This is something we've been working on with the city, and then we've been working on it with a class at UC Davis over the spring on this element. So what is a disadvantaged community? It's kind of a term of art in state law. It's defined as a population that includes both sensitive populations, so those who are likely to be affected by environmental pollution, and then areas that are also affected by high pollution burden. So not all low-income communities or sensitive populations are exposed to a lot of pollution, and not all high pollution areas are sensitive to the impacts of pollution or are lower income. So we want to look at the kind of where those 2 things meet together to identify those populations. So this is the graph that's a little hard to read on the screen, but this is essentially the screening methods that we use to identify whether there are disadvantaged communities within a city or a county. So on the first side, we use a tool called CalEnviroScreen. It's a ranking method that looks at every census tract across the entire state of California. It looks at all the cumulative burden of pollution and evaluates the sensitivity of the populations within that census tract, and then it ranks every census tract from Trinity all the way down to the port of Long Beach, and then piles them together into one overall ranking. The second method we look at, we also just look at areas that have low incomes and that have a high level of pollution burden for any kind of pollution variable in terms of environmental pollution. We combine those 2 things to help us identify those disadvantaged communities. Now the first method is what I mentioned before, is this tool called CalEnviroScreen. This is the map of what it looks like for the city of Davis. In general, this screening method doesn't flag any census tracts as being both very high pollution burden and having very high sensitivity to those pollution burdens. Now, again, you're being ranked against every census tract in the state, so the Port of LA, Long Beach, Sacramento, right? You're looking at a lot of different factors, but you can actually see South Davis. You can see census tracts starting to pop up as actually being kind of above average across the state. So in addition to looking at just this tool, we do the thing that I had mentioned before. We look at where are the low-income communities as identified here within the city itself. So this map shows the census tracts that are at 80% or less than the area median income here within Yolo County. So for Yolo County, that area median income at 80% is $91,000 per year. He says, checking his math. So you can see actually quite a lot of the city has census tracts that are, census block groups that are what we would consider to be lower income areas. Now, you might have already figured out the punchline to this, which is most of these areas actually have very high rates of student population. So so populations who are basically in the 18 to 24 cohort that you can see in the census tract. More or less all of these census blocks have populations that are greater than 30% of that sort of student age population. So those students often don't have jobs or full-time jobs, right? So their incomes are a little lower. But we don't screen any of those out because there are plenty of students who are also disadvantaged and being exposed to pollution, even if you're a student and even if you're not fully employed, can still be an environmental justice issue. So then we took those census tracts that are lower income and then we combined them with areas that have higher pollution burden. Now, this map shows those areas that have both low incomes and higher levels of pollution burdens. And those are shown in orange within the city and kind of a redder tan outside of the city. Now, what we've done is try to flag the particular pollution burden that census tract is exposed to by showing those little dots. So if it has a green dot next to it, which you can see around many of the census tracts on the periphery of the city, those are census tracts that have a high level of exposure to pesticide uses. Not surprising, you're surrounded by agricultural uses, right? If you see the lighter blue dot, those are census tracts that are being flagged as being potentially exposed to groundwater threats. Those are things like on the UC Davis campus, there are confined animal feeding areas. Those get flagged as potential groundwater threats. You'll see the darker blue, those are impaired water bodies. You'll see those kind of at the top of the city and at the bottom of the city. So those are federally listed water bodies, things like Willow Slough Bypass, thank you, Willow Slough Bypass and Puta Creek, which have been identified as having high levels of contaminants for certain chemicals. You'll see things like you'll see one solid waste site both north and south of the city. Those are your landfills, one here just north of the city in Davis and one also in Solano County. Cleanup sites, those are things like your classic leaking underground storage tanks. Those are things like older gas stations that have been identified and are being actively cleaned up or have been cleaned up. And then finally, so there are some hazardous materials sites. Sometimes those are similar and they're overlapped with those cleanup sites, but also sometimes there are things like a CVS, which collects hazardous materials and sharps, so they get flagged in these analyses too. So there are different types of environmental pollutants in each of these areas, and this is just an overall screening method. And what you'll see in our environmental justice analysis, which again should be published tomorrow, is that we've outlined and documented the specific environmental exposures within each of those census tracts, what they are, and then other compounding factors in those areas. So when that might be related to access to public services and amenities, or housing quality, or other things, so we really understand what's happening in each of these neighborhoods overall. Okay. So now we're on, I'm hoping to the funner part of the evening where you all get to talk about what you think are the most important issues for us to study as part of this process and the strategies we should be thinking about in this process. So We focused a little bit on the housing issues and strategies on the housing side of things. For you, I know when the council was looking at which commission touched which part of the general plan, they focused your role on the housing element in particular. We're not updating the housing element as part of this process since it was just updated 3 years ago, but the land use element is going to include a lot of land use policy that affects housing. The environmental justice element that will touch on a lot of housing policy. So those comments will come into the general plan in a different way than just the housing element overall. So on your screen and in your packet, or a list of some of the issues that we've heard to date around housing in particular. Those were through that Commission Palooza that we did with you all, through council study sessions, through committee workshops. We've just been pulling it together, as well as our technical analysis. Now, we're not asking you to really just tell us what's on these lists overall, but really to identify if there's a huge priority for you or any additional details. So if you want to go into the weeds on an issue, that's cool. Or if there are things that we have not identified in here in particular. We want to just make sure that we're catching all the issues right now. And the second part of the discussion, the second question, is really on the strategy side. So we've identified these issues, we have this project vision and outcomes. Now, how do we bridge the gap between the two? So how do we get from where we are today into the future? What are the strategies we want to move forward into the general plan? Now, these are some of the things we heard through our, particularly through our community workshop. When we asked people about issues, they threw up strategies. They were like, do it this way. So these are the kinds of things people told us that they wanted to see us do. And again, these are really focused on some of those housing-related issues in particular. Okay, and then here are those two questions for you all this evening. So really, any kind of key issues and opportunities you want to make sure that we know about as we start to write policy and develop these land use concepts, making sure we hit everything. And again, any strategies you want us to move forward and think about it through this process as we start developing these land use concepts and the policies for the general plan itself. I think it's really important generally to recognize all this has a huge context right now. So I want you all thinking about disadvantaged communities. I want you all thinking about climate change. It's been an issue that's come up over and over. And there's been a lot of changes in federal law and policy recently that obviously affects the work that we do here locally. So that's all context that's important for us to understand and to think about as we do this work. Thank you for listening to my long presentation this evening. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Looking forward to hearing all of your ideas this evening.
All right, I guess now we will be having a discussion, public comment. Is there any public comment about the presentation we just heard on the general plan? Hearing none, let's open up for discussion. I'm sure there are questions and comments.
I want to circle back to, thank you for the presentation. I want to circle back to the environmental justice element. And, you know, as I was listening to, you know, I think it's probably some other commissioners were like very attentive to where they lived, like what color that, you know, their neighborhood was on that map. But as I was thinking about that, and particularly as you mentioned at the tail end of your comments about how climate change is affecting all of this, I think we maybe had like a tiny discussion about it at this commission, or maybe with some commissioners offline about, I really believe it's important that we develop better sort of frameworks within development to incentivize, make it required, whatever the thing is, for these multifamily developments to either be required to, or like I said, are incentivized to upgrade their energy efficiency sort of standards in these buildings. I think, you know, there's a natural sort of economic incentive for people who are owners of their home, where they are in control of both the, you know, those energy efficiency upgrades and also are paying the costs, to have a natural sort of financial incentive to make sure that the, you know, the windows, you know, the water usage and everything is up to par. Renters like myself, and you know, and as you noted, so many, people proportionally in Davis are paying the cost but don't have the control over that. And so I'm just wondering, as I look at this map, and of course, again, it's one of these people in one of the orange sections, kind of close to the north of town. I do recognize, particularly, how much pesticides are important with folks around the periphery. But I feel like so much of it's focused on what I would think of as like old school pollution, but I don't really sort of see how we're taking account for how people relative to where they live in town are affected by, heat island effect and just other sort of more temperature-based. So like what opportunity is there for us to make that a consideration in the environmental justice element is my long question.
It's a great question. So we'll be, just like stepping back, so as part of this, we'll also be updating the safety element. The safety element is the place in the general plan where the state law says that you have to address climate change as part of your work. It's obviously a cross-cutting topic, which will be integrated throughout, but there will be very specific analysis and policies that are done within the safety element for things related to hazard mitigation and preparedness, right? So those kind of classic elements of emergency management, operations and preparation. Now, within the environmental justice element, we'll definitely have policies focused on those disadvantaged communities. So at the core and spirit of SB 1000 and environmental justice is that it's not environmental justice for all, it's environmental justice for identified disadvantaged communities, right? So while pesticides might expose quite a lot of people, the concept of environmental justice policy is that it really is focused on those who face the most disparate impacts from those pollutants. When you look at climate data, for example, I don't know if you work in this world, but you often see the data, like we're gonna look at the city and generally see the same heat pattern across the city because the data is big scale, regional scale, it gets downscaled a little bit, but it's hard to see the very nuance of what's happening within the community. There are some communities that have very good heat island databases, right? So you can see where there's areas that are highly exposed. When I've looked at the data, there's not that much variation across the city. Now, I'm sure in micro scale there probably is, but when you look at the data, the patterns to me aren't dramatic enough to affect those identifications of disadvantaged communities, but certainly something we can look into in a little bit more detail. And we do have to look at what we call unique and compounding effects. It's part of the legislation, so it's not just environmental pollutants, but it's do you have access to public facilities, how good is the housing quality in those neighborhoods, and other factors. That's something we can consider as well.
Thank you.
Just kind of a general question as you're talking about some of the different housing elements that are coming up and looking 2-3 cycles ahead. We have, as you obviously know, 2 fairly major projects coming down the pipeline that are going to be voted on that may or may not affect kind of how this plan goes. How is that being worked in or not worked in? Is it kind of, we'll see what happens next year and then adjust accordingly? Or kind of how does that process work with as we update this plan? If those go through, I feel like that could affect other things that we want to talk about, or if they don't go through, same kind of way where, oh wow, we really need to figure some other things out.
Happy to talk about that, Derek. Please feel free to jump in as well. The opportunity of a general plan is that we get to step back for a second and not just look at the individual project applications that come forward, but get to look at them in a broader context. So that includes infill downtown, it includes Village Farms, Willow Grove, it includes past projects like the DISC project that have come before the city previously. So we get to take a step back and think about land use a little bit more holistically than just a one project at a time kind of mechanism. So when we start to look at the land use concepts in sort of this next phase of work, we'll have an opportunity to look at Village Farms, Willow Grove, in the context of what's happening inside the city, what's happening external to the city, and then how we all knit that together through mobility improvements overall, city's housing and open space policies and get to think about it in a bit of a broader context. So I can't tell you what's going to happen with those projects over the next few months, but at least we have this opportunity through this next couple phases of our work where we get to look and think about those, potentially get to look and think about those projects within the context of a broader growth framework for the city overall. Now, my understanding is in that past housing element cycles, in the last housing element cycle, the city had a really hard time identifying sites that would be acceptable to the state's housing and community development department for their sites inventory. Those, you cannot use projects outside of your city if they're not approved. They wouldn't allow you to use them as sites in your site's inventory. If, for example, they were passed and the voters approved them, they could be used in your site's inventory, but that's obviously much further down the road for those projects to go through. But those could be opportunities to help accommodate some of the required regional housing needs allocation.
Thank you, and just a kind of quick follow-up, maybe a similar standpoint. How do we kind of reconcile, just because something is zoned doesn't necessarily mean it happens. I think we're kind of seeing a little bit of that with our downtown plan that we just passed. We're like, oh, it's gonna be great, we're gonna redevelop all these old properties, we're gonna have, you know, high density, and now we're seeing a lot of potential projects that are getting pulled. They're saying, oh, this really isn't working out and kind of stalling. So how do we kind of reconcile what we think is a good idea from a community planning standpoint versus what's feasible to actually get some of this housing as we talk about what are our housing needs for moderate income, low income, and, you know, just because we say, I mean, you could say everywhere is zoned to build 100% affordable housing, 7 stories in Davis, that doesn't mean we're going to get that, you know, so how do we kind of reconcile what that looks like?
That's another really great question. So the city's role in a housing element and housing sites inventory, just to use that as an example, is to set the context to allow that housing to happen. I think it's recognized by HCD in particular in the state of California that the city's role is to facilitate that through the regulations that are in place. The city is not the builder of housing, it's the private marketplace. Typically it's private developers, typically it's for-profit private developers. And then in many cases, there are cities that have requirements for inclusionary housing to do that, or nonprofit developers who supply that housing. That's the city's job, is to set the conditions for it. I also know that in a lot of cases like downtown Davis, just because if you zone it for 7 stories, it doesn't necessarily that the marketplace can afford to build that unit. So again, those projects are built by for-profit developers typically, or nonprofits, and they have to meet a profit return in order to build those projects. So what we try and do is facilitate the kinds of development and the quality of place that you want, and then look at how the regulations support or hinder that, and then adjust them as necessary to meet those needs. In a lot of cases, what we find is that people overzone, right? They allow 7 or 8 stories, you can do 8 stories now. But the market doesn't necessarily support that. It might want to do 3 or 5 stories because of this construction type. It's just less expensive. So even if we establish those higher thresholds, it might not mean that it's financially feasible for our projects and project developers to do those projects. But we just try and work as best as we can to identify what the community desires are, and then look at the regulations to address them as best as we can. And we do talk to a lot of developers through this process.
Thank you. One more just quick follow-up, and I'll give other commissioners a chance to ask some questions. But are there any discussions about minimum kind of requirements? Because as you just said, just because you zone something for 8 stories, I think on the top of a lot of folks' minds is the U-Mall project. It's like there's this huge fight, let's put housing, it can be this tall, no, that's too tall, let's do this tall. And then at the end of the day, they said, oh, well, it could be this, but it's actually just gonna be 1 story, all commercial, no housing. So are there talks with, you know, kind of, I think historically that hasn't really been a problem, where people are worried that developers aren't gonna maximize how many stories they could build, whereas now we're kind of saying like, well, we could do that or we could not. You know, is there conversations of, hey, the minimum requirement is actually 3 stories here, or minimum requirements, instead of always just looking at the maximum?
We haven't gotten to that point in this process yet. That's a little further down the road. It's a great question. I just worked on a zoning overlay for a Bay Area city. It's it's a fair housing rezoning, and we did set a minimum density that was high enough that it couldn't just be single family, it needed to be at least really high density townhome or multifamily. And so, you know, we can do things to kind of push the market in a particular direction towards the housing that we want to achieve. And you see that actually a lot in places that have high quality transit service, where they might actually set really high minimum densities because they do want very high density multifamily product. They don't want townhomes because that's usually the most cost effective and valuable for property owners.
Great, thank you.
I have a couple clarifying questions. Thank you so much for this presentation, and thank you for putting it out there that all these technical reports are on there. I wish I'd had more time to study them before the meeting, because they're a good read. One question I had, just to clarify, you said we have 57% renter occupied homes. Did you say homes or 57% of our total housing stock? Because there's units versus homes, and so what I'm really asking is how many of the single-family homes are renter-occupied?
Housing stock.
Housing stock, okay. So that 57% includes our multifamily? Okay, all right. And then on the slides, it said 97% built out and 1% vacant. What's, I'm just curious about what the gap is there. In the land use paper, it said 99% built out, and so I'm wondering if 97 is a typo or if there's something different.
Oh, no, it also includes things like rights of way, right? So there's a proportion of the city that are like public rights of way, so I think it's like a percentage point in a quarter, right? And so it sort of equates to about 3%.
Okay,
Yeah.
but the 1% vacant is definitely what we're working with?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you, that's helpful. And then I had some questions. You know, you shared at the front end a really high-level summary of what you've heard so far, like here's what folks are saying. And I know that you're asking us to contribute to that. But since we didn't get any public comment tonight, I'm wondering if you could share a little bit more about what you've heard from the public. For example, the meetings in a box. How many were there? Did people cite an interest in increasing multifamily housing and upzoning in that?
I actually can't tell you about the meeting in box yet because it just closed
Okay.
2 days ago, so I haven't seen all the results from that yet.
Okay.
Survey just closed, and we just got the survey summary 15 minutes before I walked into this room, so I haven't read all the results from that.
Okay, we can look forward to that next time.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll get those published as soon as we can and get them up on the website for you.
Okay, all right. Are you doing social media push, city push to get the technical reports and summaries of the technical reports out in the hands of the public before further engagement? Or who's the audience for these technical reports other than your faithful reader right here?
Well, of course, we want you all to read these reports. The technical reports really are meant for a technical audience, as you can tell. They are pretty detailed, they are pretty technical. We are also in the process of drafting. Now that we've finished all those technical reports, we're going to create a slightly shorter version, which is what we're calling like more of a public-facing version, and it's a summary of the key findings. So it's clocking in a little under 50 pages and then trying to get a little shorter, but because it's taking information from all of the other 9 or 10 reports and kind of synthesizing it into those kind of key findings. And that we hope to get out by the end of the year, and that I think we're going to try and push out as well ahead of the next set of meetings.
Okay, that's helpful. One of the points that you had on there is that we've gained 44% since 1990. Can you compare that to how many housing units were added in that time? Since 1990?
I can't do that on the fly, but that's something we can certainly look at.
I think it would be useful as just part of the picture. And then the other point that you made of how critical it is that we look not just at the current housing element that we're in right now, but the next 3. And if this one's 2,075, right, and they seem to have been increasing consistently, what we're really talking about potentially, right, and this is a little bit crystal ball, but the growth projections are such that the growth is going up, that we're looking at a minimum of additional affordable housing units of over 6,000 if they were to stay exactly steady at the 2,075. Do you feel like that's an accurate estimate that we should be working with?
So it's a little tricky to answer that on the fly, and I'll do my best to try and answer it. One of the things, Davis wasn't alone in the state in receiving regional housing needs allocation that was significantly higher than the previous cycles. So in many cities, it was 2, 3, 6 times higher than their previous allocations. Part of that for the 6th cycle was not just meeting future housing needs, but also unmet need from past housing element cycles. So we hadn't been building enough housing, there was a huge pent-up demand, right? And so this one was particularly large. It's unclear what the next ones will look like, right? And that's going to be influenced by how well we're meeting our current needs, right, in this cycle, how the population is changing. I know that it tailed down statewide, right, after the pandemic, but has picked back up again. So a lot of those factors are a little unknown to us in general. I think it's safe for us within the general plan to be a little bit more conservative and to think of it more as, okay, well, we got 2,000 last time. It's probably reasonable to expect that we should get something around that the next couple of cycles as well, even though we don't have that crystal ball to tell us exactly what it's going to be yet with those other kind of factors in mind.
Okay, so conservative estimate then, you feel that it's okay, but you did a heavy caveat, so we all heard it, but that it's okay to think about building, expecting future, the RENA cycle segment we're talking about, over 3 more, to be approximately an additional 6,000.
Yeah, over the next, say, 3 cycles.
3 cycles, okay. Okay, all right, that's really, really helpful. Can you say, and I know that it wasn't in here much because it's in like the demographic technical report, could you talk, and I'm putting you on that on the fly again, a little bit about growth projections for the city on a 30-year, I mean, we're looking at 2050. What are, according to SACOG, what are the growth projections right now that we should be working with? Because, if our charge is housing, and we're in affordable housing specifically, the reason I'm asking for this information is in order for us to do the best that we can do for suggesting strategies and ways to address the needs, I want to be crystal clear on how many people are we talking about? How big of a gap is there potentially? How much land are we working with? You see what I'm getting at? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that we will bring forward as part of the background for the land use concepts. He says as he tries to pull up the slides. One of the things that we'll talk about is the city's progress towards meeting the current RENA cycle. So you're going to have done a really good job of meeting your MOD requirements. You already exceeded your MOD requirements for this cycle. You're on your way to meeting your above MOD requirements for this cycle of RENA, but you're having a hard time, like other cities, in getting the affordable housing that you need. This is not an uncommon problem, and the same problem we've had during the past cycles. What we know about the SACOG projections is that through 2050, they estimated 4,300 units of new housing here in Davis. Now, the SACOG projections are based in part on land availability. They're also focused on what we call policy projections in our profession. They're not solely based on population and demographic trends and the economic models. So they make choices about where to put housing and jobs in the sub-region, in part to help meet air quality requirements through their regional transportation plan and their sustainable community strategy. So they're making choices in the model about where to place people in the region. So Davis was projected through 2050 to have about 4,300 units. But again, they're making assumptions about land availability, right? So what's in your current city limits, as well as that distinction of placing jobs in your housing. So like West Sacramento, for example, got a ton of housing if you look at the regional growth projections for the region, right? And that's really transit-rich, really close to Sacramento, right? It's your jobs hub for the region. Now, one counterpoint to that is the State Department of Finance. And I don't know if this is the weedy kind of answer you want to this question. The State Department of Finance also does projections, and Yolo County itself is estimated to grow by about 25% overall, which would be higher growth projections than given by SACOG overall. And the state's projections are done more looking at economic and demographic characteristics and less about, they're not worried about land availability in those jurisdictions, right? There's kind of state level, regional level projections overall. So the state seems to feel like there's more demand for population and housing here in Yolo County and probably in Davis, because Davis represents a third or so of the population here in Yolo County, for housing demand here. So you have to we're trying to look at more than just what the RENA says, what SACOG says, but also looking at like, what does the state say about population and population change over time? And that is a little bit higher than you see based on what you see in SACOG. And those state projections are some of the things that feed into the regional housing needs allocation ultimately.
Okay, thank you, that's really helpful. I mean, so if I take the headline from that, it's that the projections are fairly significant growth in terms of population with extraordinarily limited land, yeah? And the opportunity presented to us is to make suggestions on how we can best meet that demand in a city that is dominated by single-family housing and low-density zoning currently. Is that a reasonable sum up? Okay, all right. Thank you. Then, within that, I would say those were my clarifying questions. I had one more for you, which is related to the mixed use. Our mixed use percentages were extremely low, and you had it lumped together with the less than 15%. And then I believe that in your comments when I was taking notes, you got more specific about what the percentage of mixed use is, vertical mixed use. And I think we're talking about vertical mixed use here, right?
Yeah, it's typically vertical mixed
Yeah.
use, but that's mostly in downtown. There's about 1% of the population is that vertical mixed use, or is mixed use in general.
Right, okay, all right. And then we have is it Dos Rios Live Work Lofts? That's considered mixed use?
I'm not gonna be able to tell you that.
Okay, that's all right, that's right. I'm trying to think through within that 1% what our examples are, because I think that they vary quite a bit.
Yeah.
Okay,
And then I would just say that it's 1% that's existing, and then back to this question of what our policy is. So about 3% of the area is zoned for mixed use.
3% is zoned, but we haven't actually done it.
Correct.
Got it. Okay, okay. Okay, now I have a question that's not in your slide deck, about parcel splitting. When we talk about zoning, taking a single family home and turning it to a duplex. I know there's state level guidance here, and I'm wondering if you could share for the commission a little bit of what that's all about before we get into our suggestions.
Absolutely, and I would rely on Dara or Tom to talk about the city's policy around SB 9. So in 2021, the state passed a bill called Senate Bill number 9. It allowed single-family zoned parcels to subdivide their lot and to build a duplex on that lot. On that lot, you could, in addition to your duplex, you could also build accessory dwelling units of up to 2. So you could think of one single family lot could have, all of a sudden could have 4 units on it.
Okay, and so Dara, now this question comes to you. What is our current approach to that in terms of permitting and ordinances underneath SB 9 for the city of Davis when it comes to zoning and upzoning single-family lots?
We're actually working on that. This commission may be aware that we finally, took us a little while to get the Omnibus 2025 through, and that was one of the topics that the planning commission gave us feedback on when we brought it to them before we brought it to council. And we took a very quick dive into it. Thomas was instrumental. And after sending our work over to the city attorney, the feedback we got from the city attorney's office was it's a bit too much for us to shove into the Omnibus 2025 between Planning Commission and City Council, and we wanted to get the Omnibus done. It had taken us longer than we had wanted, and we kind of kept adding things to it, and so it kept pushing out and pushing out. So I called it and said, we're gonna get the Omnibus 2025 through, and we will take more time, the appropriate amount of time, to look more carefully at SB 9, look into what the city attorney feels we should move forward with, and so it's near the top of our list for 2026. Can't say it's at the very top, but it is definitely in our radar. And so with some luck and some diligence, we should be able to bring that forward. Maybe as part of Omnibus 2026, or it might be a standalone thing. We'll have to look and see just how much it encompasses and how much focus it needs, or if it's something, once we get our arms all the way around it, that it's pretty straightforward and we can just bundle it with some other things that we want to get taken care of. So it's in progress, is the short answer.
Okay, that's great to hear. And I wonder, because again, Planning Commission has housing and affordable housing, but our focus is affordable housing. If there's any sense of if that will come back to us, if there's an ability for us to review any of that or make suggestions on that, on how to increase affordable housing within that specifically.
I don't have an answer for you right now, but
Okay, fair,
if it's
fair. You answered a lot.
within your purview, we'll certainly keep working with Dana and her staff.
Okay.
And certainly if it doesn't come back to this commission, the commissioners are always welcome to comment as the public.
Okay.
And provide staff feedback that way individually, and we would welcome that.
All right, thank you. You've been incredibly helpful, and thank you for going beyond what was just in the slides, but I really wanted to know those pieces of information before we get into our suggestions about strategies, because if we have, 97%, 99% built out and only 1% vacant, and we have this amount of housing demand to meet, then it's critical for us to understand exactly what kinds of housing we as a commission need to be advocating for and what the levers are that we should be looking to. So thank you for clarifying all that.
Hi, I had a couple questions about the SB 1000 and disadvantaged communities definition. Would you be able to provide, I think I'm trying to imagine what that section in the general plan is going to look like. How can you give any examples of what, because everything that you showed and presented on was very, geographic. It was like these neighborhoods, it was census tract based, like a lot of it was, based on data that we have, GIS data that we're able to access, secondary data. And so, are you imagining that when you're highlighting disadvantaged communities in the general plan that it's going to be very geographic, or what are some examples of how, once a future disadvantaged community is officially identified, what might that look like, and what might that be called? And then I have a follow-up question, but I'm just trying to understand, the range of how we can define that.
We would, the spirit of SB 1000 is really to focus policy making on disadvantaged communities. And so in order to do that, we need to identify those disadvantaged communities. Those can be geographically based, like we're showing in the map. Those also could be subpopulation based, right? People with disabilities, for example. They can be any variety of different populations that we want to focus our policy interventions on, right? We want to make sure that the benefits flow to and accrue to those populations. And the burdens of our policies do not, right? And so we do that through maps. We'll sometimes do that through identifying specific and talking about specific subpopulations where the policy is focused on. We do include the map because we need to do certain things like, are there areas in the city that are disadvantaged that have no access or low access to parks and open space or public facilities? And that needs to be a mapped asset in the general plan so that people can see and understand where that is. So our policies will likely, in terms of environmental pollution, be citywide. Things maybe about pesticides that are citywide. And then they're going to be targeted specific to neighborhoods within the community that are either these identified populations or these specific other subpopulations.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's helpful. So it's not just geographic, but also could be subpopulations. It seems like the analysis, though, is very, geographic focused. Like, what data points or how will you decide or come to decisions about subpopulation-based disadvantaged communities? Is it through community engagement? Is it through, it seems like just, it's going to be numbers and analysis for the geographic stuff, but for subpopulations, do you guys have a plan of how you might come to a conclusion about what to include, which subpopulation to include as disadvantaged?
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll get to see a little of this when you see the environmental justice report when it gets published. But there, we've gone through different types of sensitive populations. People experiencing homelessness are in that list, farm workers, right? Those are not spatially identified populations in our work necessarily. Probably city staff know where some of those pockets of those folks are within the community, but they're not specifically identified. Indigenous populations, those are some of the things that are unmapped, so to speak, in our analysis, but I talked about more quantitatively at the city level, but in more qualitative terms in terms of the geographic locations.
Okay, so, and I'm guessing that full list is in the report coming out tomorrow?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I think that's all of my questions for now. Thank you.
So I think we haven't actually had a strategy discussion, we've had questions, so that's what we're gonna do now. So, if anyone has any strategies they want to discuss, please come forth.
I guess I just have like a question about, I have a political science degree, so I don't really know anything. I just want to loop back to what Commissioner Ennis was talking about with regard to our, abysmally low level of mixed use, and then also what Commissioner Curzon was talking about how the sort of rolling car crash that was the discussion of the the U-Mall redevelopment. Is there something, I don't know if, this is a thing that could be addressed in the land use element, but is there something that we can do to, there was a discussion about how even amongst the zoned, sort of allotment for mixed use, we haven't even hit the ceiling for that. So is there something that we can do to better encourage the actual building of mixed use, even if that's within the amount that's already zoned, or sort of, encouraging that down the line?
Yeah, so one of the things we'll look at are, even in your existing zones, right? Even aside from looking at maybe allowing mixed use in zones that are currently, say, just commercial or just housing, we'll look at some of the development standards and regulations that underpin those. So what are the allowed heights? What are the allowed densities? How do those vary across different mixed use zones, and how do those get implemented overall? So we'll look at the kind of the development standard side and thinking about that within the general plan itself, to really kind of help us understand, well, if you knock this up a floor, maybe it's more likely to happen, or maybe you need a density not of 35 units an acre, but 45 units an acre to make it more feasible for a project to move forward. We do talk a lot about not over zoning for commercial uses right now, right? We've had a big change in retail uses in the past decade in terms of like e-commerce and the loss of shop fronts overall, and we do talk about mixed use a lot. We have been moving away from from requiring it everywhere, right? Because we're seeing a lot of vacant shop fronts in a lot of places and kind of an oversupply of commercial spaces. And would that space be better utilized as housing or as amenity space in a building? Those are kinds of questions that we're asking more and more. So while I agree that we should be striving for mixed use, particularly horizontal mixed use, and you like your downtown, and you can have a great mix of uses in your nice walkable downtown. Also just being thoughtful that maybe you don't want to require retail everywhere or commercial uses everywhere, just to make sure that you're meeting the needs that you're of the demand.
Thank you. And so this, just to clarify, a good chunk of this would be sort of, I don't know, recent history market analysis of sort of like seeing what's feasible or has been sort of workable in other communities. Is that what you're saying? And so like how wide is that net being cast? Are we just looking at the Sacramento Valley area? Like how are we sort of making a determination about, okay, well, Lodi did that, but this other community did this and it sort of worked out there. That could maybe work out in Davis. How are we sort of making that determination?
We don't have any precedent communities that we're looking at specifically right now, but the team that you're working with and our team has experience all over the state of California, all over the West Coast, all over the country, working in lots of different types of communities, including our economist, which is BAE Urban Economics. They have offices here in Davis, but they're all over the place, and they do work everywhere for a lot of different kinds of communities. So they really help us understand that demand for retail spaces and what's really possible in different communities.
Thank you. The reason I bring this up is, I think we've talked about in the past how sort of development options that are more dense can sort of just by that structural nature be a little bit more affordable, even if we're talking about just, market rate affordable. And so I think that as, we're looking, going back to what our drive is this commission to advance or sort of expand that, either market rate affordable or specifically, subsidized affordable housing. I think that finding a way to up that number of, or that proportion of mixed use, I think could be a way of getting there. I recognize, some of the things that you said about it's not really kind of a one size fits all, particularly as people's sort of shopping trends are changing. But I think, like I said, figuring out what sort of strategies we could pursue to advance that, I think would be a good thing for us to look at in, like I said, maybe perhaps the land use element.
Okay, so on the strategies point, I think I have maybe two thoughts that are related. In the 3 months that I've been on the council, we've heard about the Village Farms Affordable Housing Plan and the Lumberyards Affordable Housing Plan. I think in all, there were fewer affordable units than we all would have liked in those two projects, but they kind of were constrained by different pieces, like the Village Farms was the PIP, and I think there were some areas for improvement on the PIP, and then I think on the Lumberyard project, we were constrained by some pieces of the inclusionary zoning ordinance that were out of date. So I think, is it in scope for the general plan discussion to think really long-term about that inclusionary zoning ordinance and to think about updating it? And maybe that entails like some body of people or some organization conducting like a really specific market analysis to understand what truly pencils for affordable housing, such that then you can kind of back out the best way to write the incentives and write the rules for the inclusionary zoning.
Part of what we're going to be doing on our team is to be looking at some housing prototypes and to understanding the financial feasibility of different housing prototypes. So those could be ones that are currently existing and allowed in the community here, or there could be ones that maybe aren't currently allowed here that we want to encourage through this process so that we can understand the financial implications of those. And that would include an analysis of what's required in terms of that inclusionary housing policy. We're not really scoped to look at different scenarios for inclusionary housing, so like 5, 10, 15% of different income levels. That's not part of our scope of work, but that's something that a lot of economists do to look at the feasibility of those. One thing I'll just say is that not much is financially feasible right now. So when you do those kinds of analyses, when they're general like that, you often find that things are marginally feasible or not feasible right now, and part of that's related to construction costs, part of that's related to financing that's federal, part of it's related to local rules and regulations. It's not specific to Davis, it's not specific to Davis particularly, it's everywhere right now, so I think it's just really hard to get projects out of the ground generally. So when we do this analysis, it's based on the conditions right now, and when the conditions are really bad right now, when we do these general analysis, we tend to find that nothing is financially feasible. That's just my experience working, and that's not even talking about Davis specific analysis, that's my general, like, on the projects where we have these analysis, nothing is feasible except townhomes. Just at this moment, but the market will change, right? And cycles will change, and interest rates will fall, and we'll do different things in the future, and it will change. But I always caution communities when they talk about that analysis, it is based on the current conditions. You can look at scenarios, but it's still hard to make those projections out. It's a really good question, though. And I would just say the general plan can have action items to do follow-up things like, reevaluate the inclusionary ordinance, to study the financial feasibility of different affordability levels. Those are classic general plan follow-up actions.
Are they sort of on your radar as of now? Are they kind of in this draft for the general plan, or?
They are now.
I have one more clarifying question. I know. Zoning for school placement and for important community infrastructure, like senior residential facilities that have capacity for handling patients with Alzheimer's, right? Really specific settings. How are those zoned? And what are the restrictions around the location of those kinds of facilities?
Are you asking about currently, or where we think we're going with the general plan?
How about both? Just so we understand that.
Oh boy, okay. We've identified school sites in conjunction with the school district, with the existing general plan, so it's been a while. So that would be, I don't know if I'm gonna answer both of these, maybe mush it all together. We'll be looking at that kind of infrastructure, schools specifically, senior housing or other kinds of care, types of congregate care, that kind of thing. That'll be part of what we do with the land use. And then it will get down into the weeds as far as what the zoning is, because of course, once we do this general plan update, then we have to zone everything. And that's really where the rubber will hit the road, and that'll be after the general plan update, after the environmental impact report for the general plan. So the zoning will really come as sort of a phase 3, if you will. I mean, we'll be working on it as concurrently as we can, but of course, it will be informed by the general plan amendment that's adopted.
So if we were to recommend upzoning, and I'm just, saying pervasive upzoning, whole city upzone, right? If we were to say that, we wouldn't necessarily be precluding ourselves from important zoning options for community infrastructure like that, as described, right? Like I'm curious about how far can we go with upzoning for housing that wouldn't cut into available space for what I know is also critical to the needs of our community.
So I think that's really great feedback. That would be, something like Eric just mentioned, it would be an action item or a task coming out of a policy that was set through the land use.
Okay.
So that's perfect feedback, I think, for us tonight. Like that's something you want us to really focus in on and make sure that we're addressing.
Right, because again, our commission, we have a very narrow focus, but all of these issues are interrelated. We're talking about planning for our community and all of the people within it who are here now and will be here in the future. And we're in an anticipatory state, and we must be optimistic about how many people are going to be here and how well they're going to work together and how happy they will be while they thrive in this place that we envision. And I want to make sure that when one group says, we need to push for this, we don't accidentally rob ourselves the opportunity to meet a different need, right? And I know you're gonna have a coherence process for that, but,
Yeah, so that's what the general plan committee is tasked to do, where the two representatives from each commission will come together in that broader commission.
right,
And that's exactly the purpose of that commission,
Okay.
is to crosswalk everything, reconcile everything, and figure out how to balance all of those competing priorities.
okay.
Housing, jobs, open space, affordable housing, schools, mobility, though, that's exactly what we're here to do and figure out the best possible plan.
But tonight, housing.
But tonight, affordable housing.
Affordable housing specifically. So I would say that a key strategy, based on the information from the clarifying questions before about the minimum 6,000 affordable that we're looking at as the ballpark, the growth projections that slightly differ from who you're asking, but all of them say much higher, right? And the fact that we have limited vacant land, that we're 97% built out, that we are dominated by single-family zoning. The only way forward that I see to meet those demands is to increase density across the city. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean we go high density across the city, but I'm open to that conversation. But I think, you know, going from low density across most of the city, we will not make it. That is, though, why I want to understand how we've grown 44% when I've understood that our growth cap started at that time and that our build-out stopped in the early 90s, right? So if we've grown 44% when we also had a growth cap, are we overcrowding, right? And I think that might be within the demographic report. But if we're going to grow this much and we have an affordability demand that high, then I'm concerned that if we do not increase density by going vertically, then we're asking for an overcrowding situation. We won't have the infrastructure to support it. So I think the only way to use the roads we have well and make sure that they can be supported with a reasonable tax base would be upzone. Of course, we're talking about private property in most of the city, right? This is personal property owners that need to make these decisions for the homes that they own. So the next strategy that I'd like to suggest is that we do a review of what the barriers and incentives are for individual current property owners to retrofit their properties to meet this demand. Does that mean retrofit support for meeting our climate and environmental justice issues that were very clearly presented tonight in terms of air quality, et cetera? Does it mean thinking about doubling on what's on a single property? Because that's going to have implications for road use, right-of-way, and active mobility, sidewalks, et cetera, which I know that's part of the coherence question. So leaving that part that's outside of our house, so to speak, I would say it's clear to me we need to upzone across the city to meet the demands of our future population.
I have a kind of a follow-up on a few of those points that I agree with almost holistically. But I'd be curious to see the population growth, not from 1990 to today, but 1990 to 2000, and then 2000 to 2010. And then because we did have Mace Ranch built in the 90s, and we did have Wild Horse that was either late 90s or early 2000s. So we had some pretty significant single-family homes built. So I'd be curious where the stagnation started, because it certainly wasn't in the 90s. Was it in the 2010s or the 2010s to 2020, et cetera? And then the other point about kind of upzoning is really making sure, I know we're supposed to be having very broad conversations, but to make a more specific point, targeting where the key redevelopment opportunities are. We all know redevelopment is extraordinarily expensive. If you have, the Davis Collection is not going to get redeveloped in this general plan. That's going to last 50 plus years. What large commercial properties, when we talk about mixed use, will be redeveloped? I mean, we have huge shopping centers on East 8th Street, Cowell, Covell. Just think about where all the Nuggets, Safeways, grocery outlet, bargain market. Where those are, what can we make sure that when those do get redeveloped, which I don't know how old some of those are, but within the next 25 years, it wouldn't surprise me if 1 to 2 needs to be kind of torn down and built up again. That's the opportunity where we have to build housing there. And how do we make sure we build housing, both lowercase and uppercase affordable, and make sure we really nail that zoning right, because we only get one shot at those redevelopments, you know, per generation realistically.
Does anyone else have anything else they want to bring up?
Yeah, I've agreed with a lot of my fellow commissioners tonight on the strategies they've recommended and put forth. I want to pick up a little bit on what Commissioner Conrad was saying about our inclusionary ordinance. I think this is, I'm going to pose a question, I think, to the commissioners. I don't know if the place for this, the general plan is the place for this conversation, but I think certainly, you know, this commission is, and I think it's a conversation we should continue to have with Director Bailey and and Councilmember Partita. How do you all feel about deed restriction as our tool for maintaining affordability in housing? Is it? I'll start by saying, it seems like it works somewhat, but it also, you know, we've heard of issues with the administration of this and challenges and losing properties. And it seems like there are other tools out there. I'm just, internally, I'm not fully convinced, and I probably don't have enough information to know that this is the right end-of-the-line tool for maintaining affordability and for our overall goals for this. And so, I'm not sure if this is something that we incorporate in the general plan, but I want to start by asking the commissioners, how do you all feel about deed restriction as I think inclusionary zoning is separate from deed restriction. Like, inclusionary zoning, ensuring developers are having a certain number of housing units affordable is one thing, but then how do we actually maintain that affordability? We're using deed restriction. How do you all feel about that as our tool? I don't know, strategies around using that, or whether or not we should consider other tools.
My gut instinct is that actually is a perfect thing to talk about in the subcommittee report that we're going to give out on our work plan for 2026. I think that's something we could definitely consider. I'm not sure if I'll defer to y'all if that's something that is worth talking about in the general plan at this point in time about the inclusionary zoning, or if that's something that would probably come up later, or I know inclusionary zoning has changed many, many times under the current general plan. So if that's, you just kind of leave it as, we'll revisit this, as was mentioned earlier, every 2 years we're gonna, during this general plan process, we'll kind of revisit that. But I definitely think that is something we should talk about. I think that's a very good thing, but I'll defer to the experts on how that relates to the general plan.
What I would say is that you could also not just be thinking about deed restrictions, but how you can encourage the housing types that are more naturally affordable in the community. ADUs are the simplest thing we always talk about, but how do you accelerate ADU production? We find that, something like 70% of ADUs in California are used as rentals, whether they're rentals for family, given for free, or actually on an open market. They can actually be, they're really cost effective and can be helpful for actually meeting a market need for different types of housing at different affordability levels. So, the general plan is a good place to talk about that kind of strategy too, so that the types of housing that help us meet the needs of lower and moderate income workforce housing types that aren't just deed restricted. So I think we can talk about that within this process too.
Thank you. I'm curious if any other commissioners have thoughts on that. No pressure too.
Just as a preview of, I guess, a possibly later discussion, I think that I feel like it's, at least my views are similar to like asking developers to contribute to the Housing Trust Fund, as opposed to other things. I think it's a tool that, does work in some specific, niche sort of scenarios, but sort of using it as a, one size fits all, just doesn't work in every sort of situation. And so I think, there's certain situations where it just doesn't seem, in my mind, appropriate to ask a developer to contribute to the Housing Trust Fund rather than to have units sort of set aside. And I think similarly, there's some situations in the recent past of Davis development history where deed restriction, I think maybe wouldn't have been the best fit for, a specific project. So I think a good tool, but not always the thing that fits.
So I have a lot of feelings about inclusionary zoning. We're going to try to keep it brief in that it is currently the best lever that we have available to us. We need to expand our pathways for building affordable, and I really appreciate what Eric shared about building for affordability through having a variety of housing types. And I appreciate what you just said as well, but about, the complexities of the Housing Trust Fund. But right now, the only way that we've built affordable housing in Davis is through our inclusionary zoning requirement, except for Paul's Place, right? And one of the things that's not being met by our inclusionary zoning requirement right now is meeting the needs for extremely low income. That's a major gap that we have that we're not meeting through our current ordinance requirements in the process, right? So I think it is our commission's duty to be continually vigilant about where those gaps are and where we are not meeting the needs of all people in our community that are struggling with housing affordability. And that is one area where we need an additional lever. One way that we can do that is through the Housing Trust Fund and through public-private partnerships. There are other ways. And another that Village Farms brought up, which was the addition of a co-op, right? A co-op has affordability built into it, but is slightly different, in a different category than an inclusionary zoning requirement. So I wholeheartedly support a frequent and diligent review of our inclusionary zoning ordinance to make sure that it's meeting the needs currently and within the next few years as best we can predict for our affordable housing demand. And right now we know that it's imperfect. We haven't actually finished the revision for the for sale portion of Chapter 18. We've only done the for rent. And my understanding is, and maybe Councilmember Partida can speak to this, I believe that that's coming up on the docket in 2026. So those opportunities are already happening separate from the general plan, but we want to keep them in mind so that when we are suggesting ways to reach our affordable housing goals, we keep our local ordinances up to date with what those goals are. The general plan goes long range. The ordinance needs to keep pace. We need to keep our code matching the needs on the ground. So imperfect lever, but we have to pull it. It's the one we have.
Yeah, I just want to say I agree. I think, maybe that's something that we can discuss with our work plan, but I feel like I have other concerns about our ordinance based on how some of our affordable housing plans have gone recently. Okay. Thank you.
What else did you need from us in terms of strategies? Did we cover what you needed? Yeah, we asked you a lot of questions, but did we give you what you needed from us? Because you gave us a lot.
Like things to consider.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, just first of all, happy to answer any questions that you have. And part of these are just an opportunity for you all to interact with the planning team as we go through this process, and the kinds of questions you ask us also help us understand what desires you all have as commissioners moving forward. If you do have other, we can go, maybe if we could put just a list of issues back up really fast, and you could just popcorn and say there's something that's missing from this list that we want to talk, that you want us to consider, even just really quickly. You don't have to get into any details. Does this look complete? Am I missing anything?
I would add, we have the affordable childcare, which I know is critical because that's a unique setting, but I want to add in that specific settings to meet the medical needs of our senior population. And school locations as connected to housing, how district boundaries and our projections for housing being built match up.
When I see the services for vulnerable populations, I wonder what are the services, what are the organizations that are considered to provide them? How are we going to build their capacity so they are able to meet those needs? I guess I have more questions about what that actually looks like. So, yeah, and I assume that would probably follow some need assessment that would determine what services are most needed. So I guess that's just a comment.
I was thinking of this.
I would just sort of, it's probably already considered in the access to community amenities sort of bullet point, but I recall when y'all were in that section in the presentation that we were talking about like parks and, just as an example, I would, hope that we're putting some specific attention, particularly for the multi-family housing about, I think I'm repeating this heat island effect over and over again, but there's so many, there not so many, but there's a number of apartment complexes in town that are just like a sea of concrete. And I think, is that how close you are to a park or a grocery store? That's kind of a different thing, but I think, I'm privileged to have a pool then because I can't swim, I never use, but there's things that I have access to in my apartment complex that I know other apartment complexes in Davis don't have access to.
I had a super quick question. What was Wild Horse Golf Course considered in the little zoning? For some reason, I remember I was gonna ask about that. It looked like it was green for like public space use, but it's not really public if you have to pay to use it. So I was just curious if that was considered like, I know the easement or whatever is technically through the city, but it's certainly a lot more expensive than the muni.
It's actually it's zoning designation, excuse me. So it's existing land use, you would say, is kind of a park, an open space type, golf course being one. It's also surrounded by, I think there's an agricultural buffer that is adjacent to it as well. Its zoning, which is what you said, is actually planned development, so that was probably an entire area that was developed at the same time, and it just falls under that planned development.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, I just don't consider that golf course a public benefit necessarily. I know people who live in Wild Horse but aren't country club members, so they can see it from their backyard, but they're not allowed to walk on it,
Right.
which I find kind of funny. In a very narcissistic way. Just to clarify.
Be sure to mention to Wild Horse residents that you're laughing at their plight.
We can see it. Anything else anyone would like to add, or can we proceed to the next portion of our agenda? All right.
When is the first general plan commission meeting going to be held?
We just scheduled the next commission Palooza, or we have a tentative date for the next commission Palooza meeting. So that'll be like we did in the spring where we had six commissions come together to talk, and we'll be there to talk about land use concepts and mobility. Each from your own perspective at that discussion. That's going to happen, I think, in April is when we're tentatively, we've circled a date for after everyone's spring breaks have happened. Which is its own challenge, as you can imagine. And at the same time, we're going to go through a community process on the land use concepts, and what we envision is taking the material, like the feedback and those materials from that phase of engagement and then bringing it to the General Plan Commission. So probably in the May-June timeframe kind of thing. It's what we're targeting tentatively right now.
May, June will be the first general plan commission meeting after the commission Palooza and community engagement.
That's the tentative thinking right now.
Interesting. Okay.
All right, thank you so much for the presentation. It was very informative. And next we have our regular items, including 2025 subcommittee reports.
So I will ask that the subcommittee, everyone received all of the work plans and everything related to the last few work plans that were in development. So this is your opportunity to discuss with each other how the types of things you'd like to see going forward. We've got an email from Commissioner that we'll share with everyone. So, Mr. Jan.
I was, is there a possibility, excuse me, that we can have that on the screen, Director Bailey?
Which,
The document that Commissioner Curzon sent?
it was an email, so.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
But, what I do have. The one.
Maybe-
And I'm happy just to kind of start by doing a quick, like, 6-minute, I see 6 items here, so I'll try to keep it a minute each, of kind of what our thinking was. I had met with Commissioner Horton and Commissioner Ennis, who was apparently not officially part of the subcommittee, but an honorary member in our hearts. But they kind of talk about where we came down on some of these, and then I'd love to get everyone's thoughts and feedback and see if there's anything, we kind of want to add on here. But yeah, we wanted to keep it kind of more high level rather than here's a 20-point PowerPoint slide of like, this is what we're going to do, because we wanted to have kind of a general discussion first. But number one, and these are in no necessary priority order, so don't consider 1 versus 6 being more or less important. But rental resources, so how can we strengthen our rental resource program? I know we do have a renter's ordinance, but I know a lot of people don't know anything about it. So how can we kind of clarify, is there ways that we can maybe strengthen it, work with existing tenants and landlords to see what we can do to make it as effective as possible? Number 2, and this is almost too specific, but I think aligning city services in general with our nonprofits to make sure that they are complementing each other and not competing. The example that comes to mind, I know the Respite Center and Paul's Place overlap pretty closely with ours, but then when it comes to Saturday and Sunday, folks don't stop being unhoused on the weekends or after 4 p.m. And I know obviously there's costs and there's a lot of logistics there, but how can we do the best that we can to complement all of these different programs, especially with our nonprofit partners? Number 3, exploring what a city-run rental voucher program looks like. Noting affordable housing is tough right now, and we're seeing it as we talk through the general plan. Building affordable housing is expensive. The number that goes around, it's $1 million to build 1 unit of affordable housing. That's just not super feasible. So what can we do? I mean, the phrase that I've heard that I really like is the best way to build affordable housing is build market rate housing 30 years ago. I myself, as a student, I came here for UC Davis and then lived in apartments, and I had always found the cheapest housing possible. I used Jamba Juice when I was at school, but I found a 2-bedroom apartment, 2-1 for $1,000 that I split with 3 other, people. Obviously for families, you can't split up, rooms that way. But $1,000, even in 2015, 2016, 2017, that was pretty cheap for a 2-bedroom apartment. So there are, the median rent is high, but half of those units are cheaper than that. If we can find a way to give folks who are extremely low income, who can't find housing right now, the waiting list is too long, they're not moving up, $500 a month, $1,000 a month, whatever it may be, that's immediate help right now. I know there are a lot of people that we all know who, if they got $500 a month right now to go towards housing, that can make a huge difference. I think I went over the minute on that one. Number 4 is, kind of evaluating our camping and safe parking programs. How can we expand that? I know we have a pilot with the safe parking, and I think we might get an update on that at the council meeting tomorrow, or not we, but council. So I'll be interested to kind of listen in and read some about that. But then also with kind of sanctioned camping, I know we have a lot of unsanctioned camping right now. If we could have a place that has, you're in a tent and that's not great, but it's better to be in a tent next to a porta potty or a portable shower, on an elevated wooden platform than next to a creek that, it's raining right now. It could be flooding, your belongings could be washing away. So what can we do for immediate relief as we try to get folks out of camping in general? Number 5, homeless outreach coordination. Understanding we have these great homeless outreach coordinators, kind of understanding what that process looks like and what these, I've been trying to look through some of the reports. We've had a lot of great efforts with how many outreaches we've done, but kind of upgrading those metrics to see not just the outreaches, but how many people are we getting to the Respite Center, to Paul's Place, and then beyond that, getting folks out of the Respite Center. In a certain sense, you want to see less people going, because hopefully they don't need those sorts of resources anymore. And then finally, mental health professional deployment. I think there's a better word for that, but I do know there is a mental health professional that works with police officers, and we would just love to have them come present to explain kind of their experience with the commission, to understand, what they do. I think Commissioner Horton said that they had spoken to the PAC Commission at one point, and I think, their work is very relevant to our commission, so I just love to learn a little bit more about that. With that, that is kind of and then a deed restriction, I'll add on that, I like what Chris had to say. So, yeah, I'll cede my time from there and kind of let y'all give your thoughts, feedbacks, and opinion, and thank you for the time.
And I can add these topics to this list as we kind of go through, so you let me know which one we want to add.
And I just want to extend on to what Commissioner Curzon said, you know, about the format of the work plan. The recent work plans were very beautiful, and you can tell that a lot of work went into, you know, putting them together. I think a simpler, sort of, you know, and I was sort of joking with Commissioner Ennis and Commissioner Curzon, you know, as Councilmember Partita knows, the work plans in PAC are a sheet of paper. Like, it's a PDF document that says what we're planning on doing during that current year. There's a lot less of, hey, this is what council's goals are, and this is what our, you know, authorizing resolution says. All of this stuff is important information. I don't know how much utility it serves for us as a commission to have all that stuff repeated, you know, in very lovely graphics in each of our work plans. So hopefully a format of this is what we're planning on doing, and we can just sort of pull, you know, whip that out of our pocket sort of figuratively and sort of use that as a reference later on in the year. I think is hopefully what our format is gonna move toward.
I have a couple questions. Well, one is, you know, in the past when I was on this subcommittee for the work plan, one of the things that we came up against was really like, it needs to align with the council goals. So these are really great. I think they're all important. We should do them all. And like, just let's talk through, are there things we need to consider? Like, are we able to recommend these to the council? How are we going to implement this? Are we going to have a subcommittee for each of these that's going to bring forth a proposal to the council? Is that allowable? Or is that how you guys are thinking about it as well? Because that's what, you know, we have a lot of good ideas about, like, that's something that I feel like historically we've we have some challenges of like, great, we want to do this, but how do we actually do it meaningfully and implement something where afterwards we're like, we did that. So I think subcommittees and like bringing forth recommendations to the council is one way. Also just kind of looking for each of these and all the opportunities and the presentations that come, you know, across our paths here.
I think, would you have more?
Oh, no, I'm good.
I think one of the things that we talked about also in our meeting is that there are, of course, a bunch of things that we have to do sort of like statutorily, you know, kind of each year. That's not obviously, you know, here on this list. And so, you know, one of the things that we wanted to do in this discussion was sort of add kind of that to the sort of, you know, list of priorities. We know that there's some things that we kind of have to do each year, and sort of spreading that throughout the calendar is what, you know, we need to do to make sure that kind of stuff is achievable, that it's not just a bunch of great ideas on a sheet of paper. And then also, to your point, I think at least it was our conclusion that the sort of committee process, or the committee sort of, you know, opportunity for us to work together on some of these things has seemed to work well, particularly when the commission is, as it would be with some of these items here, either looking to do something new or looking to sort of refurbish something that we've already been doing, and sort of, you know, taking, you know, 2 or 3 commissioners to sort of, you know, lean into that, you know, for a little while, and then present, you know, something back for the full commission to chew on. I think that was definitely with some of these things how we, you know, wanted to go forward. But yeah, that was just a good questions on what we had discussed but hadn't sort of presented in the summary.
I really want to second the move away from the slide deck to this, because previously the way we had done the slide decks was to do the presentation to City Council. But we also utilized it as like a strategic planning retreat to audit ourselves a little bit and talk about what we had done. And what I prefer about the form and function of this cleaner view that the new energy is bringing to the commission is that it's really specific about timeline. And that is something that we have not done in our previous work plans, is identify, we just sort of bit broadly over the course of the year or maybe 2 years, this is what we wanted to accomplish. And I think being more concrete through the power of the subcommittees, and we're going to establish a subcommittee on this task, and it's due in 4 months. Okay, go do the work. We look forward to hearing back from you at that date 4 months from now. That rhythm is working better for us. As you've said, Commissioner Horton, that has shown to be a good pattern for our successful work products. So, yeah, I just want to commend the two of you for looking at our previous work and then taking us to a next level by being so task-oriented.
I just want to add on to that. I think it would be good for us, at least to begin in this conversation, trying to not prioritize necessarily, because as Commissioner Curzon said, there's not, the numbers aren't really relevant in terms of how important the issues are, but try to think about, you know, as we're looking at calendar year 26, how some of those things would, you know, is this a January item? Is this a, you know, is this a June sort of thing? How we want to sort of spread those throughout the year so that we can really focus on, I think as, you know, a number of people have noted, making sure that these things are achievable and that we're not looking at December and being like, wait, did we do anything again? So if folks have ideas about, I think we, Commissioner Curzon and I discussed a little bit of this, but like where some of these might best fall in the calendar.
If it's okay, I so appreciate like this start. So thank you for coming up with this list and sending it out and having it sent out prior to this. But I don't have an answer to your question necessarily, but I do feel like there's this, I feel like they're all really, really important. But that some of them are just like information gathering, like helping us understand how things work, which I feel like I need, and maybe we need as a body. And so there's this sort of one column, which I just drew on my paper here, which is sort of like information gathering. Like, so we can invite people to, community members, organizations to help us inform. Like, numbers 5 and 6 are very much sort of like, we need this background so that we can think about how these services work in the community. And then there in the second column that I drew on my little paper here, is that there's like actionable, not that the information gathering isn't actionable, but there's sort of like potential like exploration, like research opportunities for us to really sort of take a deeper dive into I got all sort of excited about those sort of downstream, but about, how can we, safe parking, camping, like what can we do to understand how other cities are, coming up with strategies. I also wrote down and really sort of figuring out how do we expand services to people experiencing homelessness with the agencies we already have. So I just very much want it to be something that's actionable, tied to a timeline. I'm just hugely supportive of that and super excited about that. Can we extend our work plan into a second year and kind of figure out what might fit within a year's time, and then have some projects have multiple?
No, thank you so much. It's funny, as you said that, I was like, during some of the other comments, I was like, wait, this is more of a presentation. This is like an ordinance that would need to be passed. This is like something that council would take action. So I started writing the same notes, so that's great minds. I almost kind of intended for this meeting to be a conversation for us to take feedback and then come out with a more flushed out, we'll go in and fill in this, beautiful Word document with kind of the thoughts that we come together here, and put in the timeline for the presentations. Obviously, we're gonna have to work with staff on that, so working with Director Bailey on the timeline that would make sense with them. But for some of these other things, camping, voucher program, it probably would have to start with some sort of subcommittee with us, and we come up with a report to say, hey, we actually think this is viable, or it's like, we spent, 3 months researching this, and it turns out it's not probably gonna work, which, happens, that's okay. But I think, that kind of timeline and process and subcommittee process, I mean, some of the folks who have more experience here are really showing the logistics of how this works, so I really do appreciate that.
I also want to check in on a couple, like bread and butter aspects of being a commissioner that aren't reflected in the work plan and that aren't statutory, like CDBG requirements, such as we need to be present and learning from the city. Commissioner Horton went to one of the DJUSD presentations, right? You don't have a child in the schools right now, but you were there.
Which
because-
came up in my conversations with some of the parents there.
No, what's important is that you were seeking out, and I'm complimenting you publicly, Brenda, because what you were doing is you went to where there was a tough community conversation happening, and you were present as a social services commissioner to learn, right? And so making sure that we have in our work plan that that's a norm, that we go to the respite center meetings, that we are visiting the sites. And our liaison model was part of that. That was started, I guess, I don't know, Dana, 2 years ago? Was for us to go and learn and bring the information back. So that's a formalized way that we've done it, but we need to make sure as a commission that we are taking turns going to city council, that we are showing up to give comment when it pertains to our area, and that we're going to major community meetings and letting each other know, hey, I'm gonna be there and I will report back.
So I would add to that, the importance of reporting back, because we have a section in our agenda that is always
Yes.
there, that's commissioner updates, and we very rarely share very much in those opportunities, and so I would like us to, we all have, probably either through work or through volunteering to go to these types of meetings, have information we can share back, and I think that we need to all kind of take more advantage of the opportunity that's on the agenda every time.
It's a great point.
And one thing to keep in mind, because I was going to bring it up, if you're going to attend community meetings, if you guys know in advance that a meeting is coming up, kind of agreeing who's going to go so that we don't run into branding issues, that would be really important, so we could figure out a way to do that.
And I would also add, if there is knowledge of meetings coming up, like the school one I might have heard about, because I do have kids in schools here, but if there are meetings that come up that would be relevant for Dana, you, or for even amongst ourselves to share, I guess via email.
Yes.
Or in these meetings, if we know there's one like next month or a couple months or whatever, and then we can agree, okay, I can go. Because multiple of us can go, we just can't sit together.
You can't sit together, and usually it's at less than 3, so it needs to be only about 2 nights.
If
Do we
the
know-
event's open to the public, can't we all technically be there, we're just not allowed to talk about business?
So the perception, you do want to be careful about the perception.
No talking about
I would
camping?
recommend that, I would recommend agreeing in advance, just so you avoid that perception, it doesn't become an issue, we know in advance. And again, if 2 of you are there and you can report back, that's great information, everyone doesn't particularly need to be there.
So I think that whole conversation is somewhere, I don't know, it's not exactly in here, it's kind of embedded in like learning from partners and understanding things, and so I don't know if we want that to just be one of another goal, or that's just like to actively seek out information and share back.
Yeah, I would be in favor of adding it as a standalone objective for the work plan. And I think some combination of whoever we like, or maybe including things like a standing agenda item, or like there's a point to like, okay, in the coming month, these are events coming up, and then assigning at the meeting, not signing, but and seeing who can go to what a little bit. Yeah, I really like this idea. I haven't done the best job myself in attending some of these community events, and also I don't know all of them and where they're at. And I think it's not just us as well. I don't know if there's also an opportunity for doing some of the consolidation of all of these housing-related events and social services-related events, not only raising awareness amongst ourselves, but also is there opportunity to do with the public as well. I don't know what channels that would be, but yeah, so I would be in favor of adding something to this effect of, creating some kind of calendar, some kind of system and calendar that shows when events are, and us discussing it regularly and having people go and share back, like formalizing that. I think it's going to take effort, so I think it should be, a standalone item on here with, subcommittee maybe, or I don't know.
Well, just to remind you.
Yeah.
We also have this inherited document.
Great, yeah.
This has just been inherited. You can absolutely blow this up and say, this is how we would like to see our calendar for this year. And, you know, we've got this one set up on a calendar year. You could set it up on a fiscal year to kind of align with what's going on with what's required by HUD. So this is another opportunity. If you're gonna do this, this is something that can be updated.
And we do have a part also on our agenda every month that is planning and long-range calendar
Yes,
where we can talk,
absolutely.
okay, in March, this meeting is coming up, X, Y, I'll go to that or someone else go to that. So, and then we can report back on what we've learned during the course of the month in the commissioner update. So it's kind of already built into our agenda structure, we just need to use it.
I did want to say, just for, at least for me, my ideal sort of 2026 work plan is a sort of meeting in the middle between sort of the past format of our work plans and this long-range calendar. Like, I feel like if it's broken down by month and a little bit more narrative than what the long-range calendar allows us to sort of, talk about in terms of why some of these items, I think that'll be sort of the best for us. And then I just, number 5, I believe, was my suggestion. I just want to just expand a little bit on the explanation there, because I do believe, as Commissioner Curzon said in his summary, that we have these professionals out here, doing the work, and we want to, at least as I term it, would like to have a little bit more meat on the bone in terms of how the program is working out in the community. But for me, I really feel like, I don't know if Director Bailey concurs, but that we've had the new, as what, DSA members refer to as the new department. We had the new department for a couple years now. And so, we had this big community, speaking of, community input, this big community engagement process, the Time for the 9 campaign, which, said we wanted to do all these things. Okay, here we are 3 or 4 or 5 years hence. How does what we're doing right now match up with those goals that we articulated as a community? And how, given our experience over these, 4 or 5 years, do we want to maybe adjust or, wiggle around how this is working to maybe better fit the circumstance that we maybe couldn't have anticipated when we started this up originally? So, it's an examination of our homeless outreach coordination, but more broadly, I think our sort of full package of social services that we're trying to deliver in the city of Davis. And then I think also, just as a tiny sort of wording thing, I think clinician was the word that you were looking for.
Thank you.
Yes. So yeah, I think I agree, as as Commissioner Curzon said, I think it was really valuable for the Police Accountability Commission, even though it wasn't very squarely in our wheelhouse to be able to hear from the clinicians and, how are they interacting with the police? What's the sort of, unofficial MOU between county HHS and PD in terms of, deploying that in the community, and how is that working out? So I think another thing, hey, we've had it, deployed in the community for a couple of years now. How is this working? We've had some, as I was, discussing, we had some staff changes in the people who were originally doing that for the city a couple of years ago. So yeah, just how is that working, I think would be really good for us to gain some additional understanding on. And I think could do that a little bit. To your point, we could sort of begin, the conversation, with county about, are they able to come down here? And then also with regard to number 5, sort of establishing some sort of committee to kind of begin doing the also again conversations with you about sort of where we are with the new department. And then also I wanted to say the number 1 item, the rental resources, I think the ball is rolling a little bit already, because, going back to some of the previous committee work before half of us were on this commission. But there's a number of reports, there's a number of committee research already been done sort of in this area. Of course, there's some slight change in some of the dynamics in the couple of years since then, but there's a little bit of already done there that some of our predecessors have done. And so I feel like that's maybe a thing that could be a little bit earlier in the year. But anyway, do hope that folks can give us some sort of timeline feedback in terms of where they think some of these things would fit the best.
I was gonna say, one suggestion for timeline is like, we could tackle well, I mean, one consideration could be tackling low-hanging fruit first too, because some of these are gonna be more long-term. It's always nice to kind of knock things out, and then we can kind of gain momentum that way too. So we can also look, when considering, when we're, as we're filling out the work plan sheet, just like the time commitment that we estimate for each of them.
I was gonna say, I would be in favor of, in terms of timeline, I think I would be in favor of kind of boiling this down to 2 to 4 goals and starting with that and either doing it, through June or something, or I don't know if we want to do, I guess, is this supposed to be calendar year? Okay, calendar year, yes, maybe more than that, 3 to 5. But I think it totally depends on the level of effort for each of these. So I mean, in terms of next step of making this getting to a finished plan, I would say boiling it down to a few less, prioritizing a few of these, and then working out kind of, okay, we need a subcommittee for this one, or we need, to have someone come present, or we need to, do research. That would be my preference.
I have a process question, real quick. I know it has to go to city council approval. Is this template the required thing that they will approve? No.
Not at all.
So do we want to, I think we should decide then what level of finished we want it to be to go up to city council approval. Because if we put a lot of, sweat and tears here into establishing the timeline and then it's not something that's approved, we will have maybe wasted some of our time. So I appreciate what you just said, Commissioner Ringer, about establishing what our top goals are and sending them that high-level PDF document that you've worked on already for approval, and then we work this part out and assign who's doing what. That'd be my suggestion, if it's okay.
And as we're prioritizing, I mean, we don't have to take anything off the list necessarily. We can say this is what we plan to
Let them
do year 1 and year 2 also.
Yeah. So I guess my proposal would be we come back with a more fleshed out proposal that, kind of mixes this, keeping it high level. Then we can all vote on it and say, yes, we're ready to send this to council. Once council says run, then we come back the next meeting and say, all right, let's dole out these subcommittees and have a party.
That sounds good. A couple specific comments on these. I already mentioned, I agree on the kind of community events and housing-related events. Like, I think that should be added. I don't see it quite fitting into any of these specifically, so I think that should be added as one of our options that we're prioritizing between. And then I wanted to comment on the stuff we were discussing earlier a little bit with the ordinance and deed restriction. Like, I'm wondering if we couch that, because approving affordable housing plans is one of the main functions of this body, and because it's one of the main ways that we're able to, meet the needs of our affordable housing stock and try to increase our numbers in the low and very low housing stock. I would be in favor of perhaps having a broader goal around reviewing our ordinance and past successes and failures with it, and come up with proposals for adjustments to it, including things like deed restriction, including things like we talked about the PIP with the Village Farms. Like, why are so many developers using the PIP? Is that actually resulting in affordable housing? Same thing with land dedication. There's a lot of questions, I feel like, and I think it's under the umbrella of the ordinance. And so I would be in favor of adding an option that's like some kind of ordinance review, or I don't know, reviewing our ordinance and potential issues, and therein and paths for improvement, I suppose. And then I think I had a thought on this last one, number 6. I think that would be great. I could also see that as maybe being under a bigger umbrella of kind of our all of the interfaces that our local police officers have with you know, the type of work that our commission supports and homelessness. And so not just the mental health professional development officer, but also I'd be interested in, you know, we had the camping ordinance passed last year, like reviewing outcomes around that, numbers around that, and also their, you know, relationship and working relationship. I mean, it's something that you know very well, Director Bailey, but understanding better as a commission and as a community, not only this specific mental health role, but also their role and relationship with the outreach team, with the homeless outreach team, and the roles that they play when they come in, when that homeless outreach team is there, and kind of the nature of that relationship. So I feel like there could be a few subtopics underneath, like police engagement with, you know, homeless populations, I guess, that could be, so it could be a little bit of a bigger category with a few different things in it. I think, over.
Commissioner Ringer is getting into some of that right now, but I just wanted to also mention, you know, this list of 6 was just, you know, what we came up with in the infinite wisdom of, you know, Commissioner Ennis, Commissioner Curzon, and myself. And so, you know, if there, as, you know, Commissioner Ringer was just getting into, if there's something that, you know, isn't here that seems like that's an important thing for this commission to be, you know, digging into, you know, feel free to share that with us. And, you know, I definitely agree, Madam Chair, that, you know, I at least would prefer prioritizing by sort of like pushing things further down the calendar rather than cutting things.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, if you have things that, you know, you think the commission should work on, but, you know, you recognize maybe aren't an immediate priority, we can still sort of have it on the list, but maybe sort of kick it, you know, further toward, you know, the next winter, this time next year.
One thing that I think was on a prior work plan was to, and that's something I want to understand better before I work for Yolo County, but I think it's still something that's valuable to explore here, is like to understand what can the county provide in terms of services and resources to the city of Davis and the residents in the community. There are a lot of things, and I think we're not even aware of all the things that could be, so that's just, and it's always, I mean, a lot of times it was unclear, it may still be, you know, where does like the city's purview and where does the county's purview start? Like, for example, like CalFresh benefits and things like that, that's like county, you know, and so, and there's resources there too, not just for CalFresh, but other services. So especially, for example, like mental health, there's a mental health, you know, behavioral health department. So I think it's worthwhile to, I don't know if it needs to go as a separate thing, or if we're just gonna have like a explore these resources or opportunities type of point as well on there, to just see what the county actually can provide to Davis residents that we might not be aware of.
I wonder if, I think that's really critical, and I don't think that's a presentation that we've ever received, actually, with that kind of detail. And that feels like, do we have things that are subcommittee items, and then as you were saying earlier, what are presentations that we bring in? And that sounds like a guest speaker potentially, right?
For sure. And I mean, even within the county, like, I could do a presentation on what Yolo Works does, but there are so many other services that are provided that I think would be really useful. And, you know, I'm a social services person, so I've always, you know, for a long time, I was like, what about social services? We're a social services commission, and then we do affordable housing. But apparently, and obviously, we are very focused on affordable housing, which is great. And we still have the social services to think about. So I think that the county really does have, that's kind of where a lot of those county services do come in. It's like, so, and I could make some of those connections as well for the presenters, but how many do we want? 'Cause
There's also state resources too that are still
That's
not
right.
county administered.
Yeah.
Like CalWorks, rental aid, and like rental assistance goes directly from the state. It's not county.
I thought of that as county, but you're right.
And I think holistically, our goal will be to get a draft of this, not the date of the meeting, but maybe a week or two ahead of time. So if there are feedback, you know, we can still have communication through email, right? Through you directly. So that way, we don't have to, you know, have everyone reacting live. You know, you have a week to look at it and kind of respond, and that way, hopefully we have something pretty polished by next meeting.
Love that.
process question. So the next meeting, we'll be doing the prioritizing next meeting? Is that when we'll have a longer list? Or you were gonna do prioritizing in the meantime and propose a shorter list?
Yeah, we'll have a proposal, and if we want to change it, we'll try to get it to you ahead of time, so that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the proposal will be the shorter prioritized few?
I think we'll probably keep everything on there.
Okay.
But
Oh, yeah,
it'll be like,
we'll remove,
if
I
we
mean,
get to it, we'll get to it kind of.
Okay.
Yeah, you know.
Like a tier 1, tier 2 or something?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I'm in favor of that.
And yeah, keeping it, I like that kind of what's presentation, what needs a report, what,
Yes.
kind of keeping those categories as well. That was, very helpful.
Because, that completely determines how many we can fit in here, I think, whether it's, multi-month
And
effort.
keeping in mind, there is a lot of information out there right now, because the county is in the process of looking at its budgets. And that's just the county, DJUSD has got processes that they're looking at. There are a lot of reports that are already floating out there, where you can kind of see some entities that's already done the analysis, and you can go, oh, this is great, we want to dig more into this particular thing. You can do that as well. So as I find reports that are relevant to you, I can try and push those out to you, so you can take a look at them and see if there's something in there that you want to explore on your own, or, oh no, this was good enough, we'll use this to explore something else.
Director Bailey, do you, of the things we've discussed, this list and other things, is there stuff that stands out to you that you think we're well positioned and it would be strategic to take on?
I think when I looked at this, I saw a lot of things that could kind of be under one heading, depending on what you want to do. Do you want a presentation, or do you need a presentation first and then have the subcommittee go, oh, we're gonna take this one thing and kind of dig into it? So all of these things are relevant. I think one thing that the presenters mentioned was looking at subpopulations. What's happening here in Davis for these particular subpopulations, and that includes seniors. There's going to be a lot of impacts to families right now. You've got, as you already charged, unhoused folks. Those are looking at those subpopulations, and what resources are available to help them, because one of the things that our Homeless Strategic Plan Implementation Committee is looking at right now is, can we do everything? And we just can't. But given what we're seeing on the federal level, which impacts what's happening on the state level, which kind of says what we can actually do locally, it's what can we prioritize where we can actually move the needle. And we just will have to make those decisions because resources are scarce. Hard, really, really, really hard to do. Hard to go from being flush, because we were flush with, ARPA and all these other things. It's hard to go back to the standard, which was scrambling.
Going back to being broke.
Pretty much, that's basically what we're doing. We are going back to,
Lottery money.
the crabs in a barrel mentality. And looking at what, again, what the administration is putting forth, what the state is telling us about, we're going to be very prescribed in these particular areas of focus. And if that's the case, can we look at these other things that just aren't on the table to be funded to move forward? It's a frustrating conversation that everybody's having right now. I'm just a little ray of sunshine. It's
I mean, I agree, it would be open to, a goal that focused on subpopulation. I know that in the review landscape analysis that Judy and I conducted, the needs of older adults in Davis came out as, it's going to be an increasing need, both in terms of housing, but also other social services aspect, but we don't have any visibility, at least we, didn't go into any detail of like, okay, what exactly are those needs, what are they accessing now, what might help, what might support that subpopulation. And so I would be, in favor of adding that as one of our short-term or long-term focuses.
All right, do we have what we need to move forward for the next meeting for that? All right. Liaison report. Gloria left. Councilwoman
Everybody did.
Martina has left. Also,
That's right, there was 52 slides. Just reminding you, we don't really have any liaison reports as of now. So I will move us through here. And we've talked about the long-range calendar already, so that's up for revision.
do we need to look at, do we have liaison reports coming up that we want
As
to
of
remind
yet,
anyone
not
about?
quite. We knew that this period it's tough to get appointments because it's fundraising season. So I figured we could revisit probably in January where people can have a better chance of getting an appointment.
Sounds good.
So next is my updates for what's happening where. I did want to provide you with an update to our affordable home ownership program and where those projects are. Still have the 8 units that have been sold so far to date. We have 6 units that are currently on the market. And I want to remind folks that when these units go on the market, the city has 90 days to kind of exercise its right of first refusal. That period means that we can bring the seller buyers that are qualified to purchase these homes, right? And so we got a wait list. We did a push on social media and some marketing to kind of bolster our wait list because it had kind of gone down, and we've added some more names to the wait list, so there are more people that are interested in some of these 6 units that are available. But we do know that some of the units, the right of first refusal period is probably going to expire. Some of them will expire this month. We've got a couple on Hackberry Place here that are going to expire in probably towards the end of the month. And then we've got some that are 2 that are going to expire in December, and then 2 that are looking at January. Now, what this means is that when the sellers are now able to sell to, they don't have to income qualify anybody, they can sell to whoever. But back to your comment about deed restriction, the deed restriction stays with the property. So whoever purchases the property is still subject to, when you go to sell, you're subject to all of the deed restrictions that are on the home and subject to this process. So we make sure the sellers are aware of that. We make sure the buyers are aware of what they're getting to, so they're not surprised. And we really, our rental resources person, she's fantastic, and she does a lot of educating buyers on what they're getting into, and works really closely with the sellers too, because this period is really when they're selling this property and they're like, why can't I just put it on the market and what's happening? She's reminding them, oh, you remember when you purchased, you had a contract that said that you will be doing this. But more than that, the city's goal is to get a unit that's available for a low-income buyer. We're trying to give people an opportunity to own a home. And so that's our priority, and that's why we stick to our guns when it comes to this right of first refusal period, and really try and encourage some of these potential buyers to take a look, see if it's something that you're ready for, and work with, we encourage them to work with some organizations that kind of help first-time buyers understand the process and hopefully qualify them for mortgages and incentives and that kind of thing so that they're ready.
How many people are on the wait list? And are they qualified, are they screened for
Yes.
eligibility? So when get their approval,
Mhm.
what is it, the mortgage approval, all in line, so when a property comes on it, they're just ready to jump on it?
Yeah, so what we do is we tell them to go to the website and then the documents that we request so we can income qualify them. Because that's all we're looking at. Can we income qualify you to purchase this property? And once we've determined, yeah, you're qualified to purchase this property, then we encourage them to find a realtor to work with, and we encourage them to find a lender to work with. We don't get in the middle of how that happens for people because our only concern is, are you qualified to purchase? We want you to do these things, we want to give you the education you need to do it, but we're only looking at a small piece. You still have to go through the process of obtaining a mortgage, which is painful. It's a long process and it's arduous, and they're going to look in a lot more detail than we are. So we try to prepare buyers for that, and we really make sure that they have a professional to help them do that process.
How many people are on the waiting list?
Right now, we've got about 32, I think, the last we looked.
And
And
those,
people,
like, it's not enough to actually, like, houses are going off.
Yeah.
Right?
well, so the thing is that we only provide them with houses that are in our portfolio that are available. And so some of these houses may come up and you're first on the list, but you're like, oh, this is a 2-bedroom, I really need a 4. So you pass on to the next person.
Mhm.
So it really is personal for folks.
Yeah.
You know, is this the right house for you? Is it the right fit? And the other things that you have to, can I afford it? You know, and all of those things, it's all very personal.
Yeah.
So,
We're still actively trying to grow the number of people on the wait list.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We're always encouraging people to kind of, to try and qualify. But more than that, we encourage people to try and be ready. Because you really need to understand what you're getting into when you're purchasing. There's a lot more involved. And like I said, we're looking at if you income qualify and we're telling you, you've got to occupy this house. So, you know, a lot of people think that they will apply to be on the wait list, but they're like, yeah, great, because we're going to rent it. It's like, well, no, that's not what this program is about. So we try and make sure they understand what the program is for. But more than that, it's getting people connected to the resources that can explain to them. You're buying a house, yes, it's a good price because the city's holding it, but you still have to be able to afford it. So work with professionals to help you understand that. And we've had people say, okay, I see this one's available, I really like it, but I'm not ready. I'm just not ready. Or I see it, I like it, it doesn't meet my needs. And so we just keep going down until we can find folks. And during this period, the buyer, the seller is required to meet with our folks. We sent them to you, they're the first people on your list. They're qualified. So you should have some reason not to accept our offer. And it better be a good one. So that's kind of how we look at it. And we've built really good relationships with some of the sellers and buyers so that, you know, we get them the information they need to make really good decisions and to understand what's happening to them and how the process works. We've updated our documents on the website. We've updated our partnerships with people that can provide them the education. You know, we've really dug into how do we make this better for folks, and it's paying off.
Good. Thank you.
So that's that, and again, take a look at the update that I'm provided to council on tomorrow, the staff report that I sent. Some of that information about our homeless outreach team is in there and how that works. Take a look at the report that we provided on the 16th, because there's more information in that. And we work closely with PD on what are we doing related to our ordinance and how are we addressing what we're doing. So we try to put that in a lot of the reports that we've done for council because they're asking the same questions. They're asking the same questions. So take a look at that. Tomorrow's going to be a late night. I have my note on. But I think I'm anticipating there are going to be a lot of questions from that meeting tomorrow, A lot more questions. So I'll know more after we do our presentation. And I can always come back and provide the update in December, so we can have a discussion about what we put on the agenda. Because there's a lot happening right now, related to resources and what will we be able to afford to do? And what are we going to be restricted to doing based on what, the way that the feds are looking at things and based on the county's budget and their ability to do things? We're having really, really hard conversations right now.
You brought up the December meeting that, we zoomed on past the long-range calendar real
Yes.
quick. I know at the last meeting, we talked about possibly adjusting our December meeting. Yeah, are we doing that?
That was a question I had for tonight.
15th of December?
Yes. So, we would decide, the last meeting we were deciding, are we gonna do December 15th? And if we're gonna do December 15th, what are we doing? So,
Seems like we have enough to talk about, so it's probably good to keep it.
okay,
It's at a convenient,
it is.
third
Third,
Monday is
yeah.
a convenient date, considering
Okay.
it was a week later. It would be inconvenient.
All right, that's my update. Yeah, I don't think we have any further comments. That's all I have.
All right, we are adjourned.
Yeah.
9:02.
Yeah, and remind folks that the meeting has changed to 6:30.
Yes.
I tried to get that out there.
Still went somewhere.
It's a lot of information. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I started doing the stupid thing where I wake up at 5 and can't get off.
Well, no.
Even on the weekend.
I love that for you.
What?